Welcome to Crosstalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. Egypt's soft coup. After a popular uprising, the toppling of a tyrant, and a parliamentary and presidential election, where does Egypt stand? Have the people of Egypt been cheated out of their democratic hopes and aspirations? And will the military ever leave power? To Crosstalk Egypt's democracy, I'm joined by Yaakov Lapin in Tel Aviv. He's a journalist for the Jerusalem Post. And in London, we cross to David Price-Jones. He is a senior editor of National Review. All right, gentlemen, Crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want. David, if I can go to you first, and Dave, in London, after 2 rounds of elections, what has really changed in Egypt? The military is still very much in power, and it does not give any appearance that it's going to relinquish its influence and wealth.
Well, you called it a popular uprising, and I wonder if that's an adequate description. It seems to me it's much more like a military coup, and that they know what they're doing on the army. Let
me just jump in. You mean a military coup against Mubarak? Is that what you were saying?
Yes, they'd had enough of Mubarak because he was trying to put his son into the succession. So there are 30 people who rule Egypt, you know, and now there are 29. They threw Mubarak out of the window because they didn't want his son to succeed. These are very competent, hard-minded, tough soldiers. And it seems to me that to describe it as a popular uprising is very hopeful. It isn't like that at all. They wanted to get rid of Mubarak, and they did it with a complicated, but in the end successful way. Now, they've been fighting the Muslim Brothers for about 50 years. And the Muslim Brothers can take to the streets, and no doubt they may well take to the streets. But the military have the tanks and the aeroplanes, and I would imagine that the Muslim Brothers are shrewd enough not to push their luck.
Okay, David, so, I mean, where does democracy fit in here, if at all?
It doesn't fit. There's no such thing. It's wishful thinking. I'm sorry about that. I've written a great deal to say that there must be, and in the end there will be democracy in the Arab world. But right now, no, there isn't any, because unfortunately they don't have the institutions. How are you going to have a democracy when you've got a military council ruling which can dispense with parliament and appoint the judges as it sees fit? And on the other side, you've just got a group of people who tried to form a party, but they were told that the parliament in which they hoped to sit is shut. Okay. So the instruments of democracy aren't there.
Yaakov, if I go to you in Tel Aviv, in your opinion, what has changed in Egypt the last year? Anything? Because David says nothing, essentially, except for minus one person.
I think, despite some of the points that David made, which I agree with, on the whole, a great deal has changed in Egypt. We've seen, first of all, a process in which a great deal of people took to the streets to express their political opinions, which was basically unheard of before the so-called revolution. And second of all, we've seen this process result in a representative from the Muslim Brotherhood, a party which has been banned under Egyptian law and which has struggled for decades to get into a position of power. Well, now one of the representatives from this movement is the head of the Egyptian state. Of course, that doesn't mean he has all the powers that he's supposed to have on paper.
Well, what powers does he have? What powers does he have? Other than ruling his own desk,
at this
apparently.
Point,
we don't know.
At this point, he can form his own government. He can form his own government, and once those elections for the parliament, which has now been dissolved, once those elections take place, I don't see any reason to believe why the Muslim Brotherhood won't take control of the parliament once again, together with the other Islamists. Well, the Islamists, I think we have to remember, are a very patient group.
Will the military dissolve the parliament again? If that, you know, it's like the European Union. If you don't vote the right way, you just keep voting and voting and voting.
The crucial thing is who's going to...
All right, David, go ahead. David, jump in. Go ahead. Jump in.
Who's going to draft the constitution? It looked like the Muslim Brothers, because they had the majority in parliament and could draft a constitution. And I think that was why the military acted, to prevent them drafting a constitution. And if they don't draft a constitution, they've got no legal power at all. And that's what the position that they find themselves in, that the army has reserved all power for itself. And by the way, just to pick up another point, I mean, have we not seen this kind of thing before? I remember '67, when the whole of Egypt turned out to cheer for Nasser because he offered to resign in the wake of the '67 war. So we've seen demonstrations on the street before, and the Egyptians do that. It's got nothing to do with democracy or even lawful or legitimate expression of anything except emotion.
Okay, Yaakov, I mean, I think it's kind of dangerous here. I mean, we could have people come out in the streets again, and if democracy isn't the answer, then maybe violence will be the answer for some people.
I think that the Muslim Brotherhood and the Egyptian military are on a collision path. These are obviously the two most powerful organizations in Egypt. We have to remember that the Muslim Brotherhood has been waiting for this day for decades. They are an organization which has cleverly provided medical and social assistance to Egypt's poor on the condition that they also accept Islamist indoctrination. And the idea is that these masses who received the help would one day be expected to pay them back, quote unquote, by voting for the Muslim Brotherhood. If you look at the situation from the perspective of the Brotherhood, time is on their side. Yes, the military has taken back nearly all of its powers. Yes, the military currently has all the important decisions. But how long can that last? How long can the military hold on to power? Eventually, the Muslim Brotherhood is going to gain more and more state institutions in Egypt, and it's going to turn the tide, in my opinion, in its favor. It's a very patient game they're playing, and I think that they're winning.
Okay. David, I mean, we just heard that
I agree
go,
with...
Go right ahead. Go ahead. Jump in.
Yeah, I agree with that. They are playing a very skillful long-term game, and they've been doing that for a good while. But if you read what they write, if you read, for instance, Said Qutb and Al-Faraj and the other people who've done this, Muslim Brothers pamphleteering, and Dr. Zawahiri and so on, what you find is that in the end, violence is the determinant. And if they don't get their way, violence will erupt. And they have that as a part of their philosophy, because they believe that what they're doing is inspired by Allah, and that Allah, anything you do in defense of Allah, as they would put it, is justified. So how you can't reason with that. That's just an ideology. And the ideology is impervious to somebody like me or you saying, well, let's wait a minute and examine your ideology. And
okay, but
that is why
but David, let's look at the ideology of the military. It's more about their wealth and position, right? I mean, they don't want to give that up. I mean, estimates vary, but up to 40% of the economy is controlled by the military. They don't want to give that up. They'll probably fight for it. They'll even fight for it.
Look, the difference is that the Muslim Brothers have an ideology. The military have privilege, and that's quite a different matter. And they own a great deal of the Egyptian economy, and they're accustomed to command. And as I say, they're very tough-minded people. And you don't want to meddle with them, because if they have to, they will use extreme methods. You know, Nasser did, in the end Sadat did, and Mubarak was none too kind. And that's what will happen. There'll be another one in that succession, if the Muslim Brothers try anything like that. It's expected by other Arabs that they will. I mean, the people in Gaza under Hamas rule are dancing in the streets expecting exactly what we're talking about. And they think that this means violence, and they're very happy about that. Poor people, the storm will break over their heads if what they want should ever, God forbid, happen.
Okay, Yaakov, go back to you in Tel Aviv. What is the nature of democracy now? I mean, are people just going to give up on it? I mean, if the military isn't going to let people elect people into power that they voted for, what's the use of it?
Well, again, I have to agree with David that what we're seeing in Egypt is not democracy, because democracy is not simply somebody casting his ballot.
Do you think that the parliament was legitimate? The parliament was legitimate. Was that election legitimate?
I believe that it was. I think it was an honest reflection of the will of the Egyptian people. But my point is that a real democracy is based on state institutions, civil institutions, and a whole host of cultural norms that currently simply do not exist in Egypt.
Oh, so now, is the military supposed to create it for them, or can the people say, at least let us have our representatives and then do everything you just said? Why does it have to be reverse? Because that's what it sounds like.
Right. Well, the military, again, has no interest in seeing any of its power relinquished, but it realizes that it has to make some gestures towards the opposition. Otherwise, it's going to end up with a second revolt on its hands. So it's conceded some territory. It's allowed the Muslim Brotherhood candidate, Mohamed Mursi, to come into power. And again, they're fighting a losing battle, in my view, against time, because the Muslim Brotherhood have the masses on their side. They have the ability to mobilize the street. And the Muslim Brotherhood, again, I don't think that they're huge fans of democracy. I think that they're using democracy as a means to get to power in a very clever way. I don't think that they plan their end vision.
What is so clever about winning elections? What's so clever about that? It's very straightforward, isn't it? Presidential election, parliamentary election?
No, not in a country like Egypt.
Not so straightforward.
Go ahead.
The reason I think that the Muslim Brotherhood acted in a way that was very long-term, in a strategically long-term, clever fashion, is because they built up bases of support years and years ago, decades ago, because they knew that one day the current system government would fall. They had the foresight. Now, I think that this is actually very dangerous. I'm not applauding the Muslim Brotherhood. I'm very concerned about the fact that this is an Islamist organization which has come to realize that political play and building up bases of electoral support are the best way to get into power. The question now is, what will they do once they get that power? And that is the question we in Israel are worried about and watching very closely.
David, what do you think? How do you think Egyptians will feel about democracy now if they can't, if elections are just annulled or rigged, as it's been suggested on this program it was rigged? Go ahead.
Well, elections are very easy to fix. I mean, look at Iran, look at Syria. It's not difficult to fix elections, and I'm sorry to say that elections in Egypt under the British were fixed. When you voted, and the policeman knew how you'd voted, and when you came out of the tent, the policeman was there to deal with you.
All right, David, I'm going to jump in here. Gentlemen, we're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Egypt. Stay. Welcome back to Crosstalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're talking about the state of Egypt's democracy. Go back to Tel Aviv. Yaakov, I mean, do you think the generals in Cairo are looking at the Turkish model at least a few decades ago of creating a secular state and having the military in control? I mean, we've seen this before. It didn't work out always very well, but do you think that's what they're eyeing?
I think that the Egyptian generals are actually fearful that something much worse could happen in Egypt.
Like Algeria?
They don't trust the Muslim...
Do you think
something between Algeria and Iran. Again, we're in uncharted territories. They don't know, but one thing is for sure, they don't want to know. They're very frightened of the idea of the Muslim Brotherhood running the most influential and powerful state in the Arab world. They don't know how the Muslim Brotherhood would run the economy. They don't know how the Muslim Brotherhood would handle relations with Israel and other countries in the region. And of course they also have their own vested interests, which have been mentioned fairly in this program. But I also think that they're very frightened by the possibility of the Muslim Brotherhood, an Islamist organization with a very problematic agenda, running such a vast and important country in the Middle East. I think that they're scared of the results of that.
Yaakov, if I could just stay with you, I mean, okay, granted they're afraid, but the more they're denied legitimate power, the more they should be afraid. Do you see what I mean? I mean, if push comes to shove, I mean, these guys, they either fly out or there'll be plenty of light posts in Cairo. I mean, it's a lose-lose situation for the military, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Well, why don't you negotiate with these guys, okay? I mean, the majority of the Egyptians support them, okay? Why don't you negotiate with them in good faith?
Let me put it into a bigger perspective.
Okay, Yaakov, you can answer that, and then we'll go to David. Go ahead.
Again, I think that the military sees this as a zero-sum game, and it's partly because Mubarak himself set up a situation in which it's either him or the Islamists. That's kind of a situation that he himself helped build. And now that he's gone, the military is playing by that same zero-sum game.
Okay, David, is that a very smart move? Because it didn't work. Well, it doesn't work for dictators very well. Go ahead.
No, it doesn't, does it? What's happening, I think, is that 1979 was a really important date in history. The downfall of the Shah and the arrival of a Shia Iran changed the whole world picture, and we have Islam on the move now, and it is spreading from country to country. And the example of Turkey, which you mentioned, is crucial. Erdogan has managed to get the army out of politics with the blessing of the European Union, who had no idea what they were doing. The result is we have 300 generals and admirals in bars, waiting trial, and removed from the arena. The Muslim Brothers, in my opinion, can't do that in Egypt, and what will actually happen is that this Islamic fervor, which is spreading everywhere, will take over from Turkey and then from Saudi Arabia, probably Jordan, and Egypt will fit into that picture. I guess that Egypt will discover that the military are going to be a counter-revolutionary force, and that they will stop the spread of Islam happening. And here, everything depends on
stop the spread of Islam in
an
Islamic region, in Islamic countries. I mean, does that make any sense, really?
Well, that's what they think they're doing, and that is why immediately when this happened, Iran, if you recall, made advances to the Muslim Brothers, to Egypt, and said, we're in this together, we're Islam together. The army then backed away from that because they realized that that is actually a death sentence for them. That people think that bad things are going to happen seems to me to be quite clear from the departure from the country of Omar Suleiman and Ahmed Sharif and other former Mubarak people who actually don't want to be there when a test of strength takes place. But the test of strength essentially is to see how far and how strong the Islamic fervor of the present moment is going to be.
Yeah, Yaakov, it seems to me the Muslim Brotherhood is they're in a trap.
Peter, can I jump in?
Yeah, I was going to say it looks like they're in a trap, at least short term. But go ahead, jump in.
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say. The Muslim Brotherhood are now going to have to make a decision. They're going to have to choose between their ideology and political realism. That's the choice they face. There's nothing.
What do you think they're going to do? What do you think you're going to do? Because power is a nice thing to have. Everyone on the program has already agreed. They've waited a long time for this moment. They want to keep it, don't they? At least some of it.
Peter,
yes,
I don't know what they're going to do.
Stay with Tel Aviv. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
I know what they've said that they will do. There was an elections rally for Mohamed Mursi about a month and a half before he was elected. And in that rally, which was attended by Mursi, he sat on a stage, a cleric took the microphone, and there were thousands of people attending this rally. Now, the things that this cleric said included, we are all Hamas, we are all martyrs, we all want to die as martyrs, banish the sleep from the eyes of the Jews, and we don't want Cairo or Mecca as the capital, we want Jerusalem as the capital, we're going to conquer Jerusalem. These are the things that were said in the presence of Mohamed Mursi, and he sat on stage and nodded. He was happy with those messages. Now, once again, now the Muslim Brotherhood are beginning to seize power, step by step. They're fulfilling their first goal, which is to take power. Does that mean that they're going to launch war? I don't think so, not tomorrow.
Well, okay, if I go to David, I mean, a lot of people say things during campaigns to get people to vote for them, okay? Campaign rhetoric and being in power often are two different things, almost always different things. David, you want to jump in?
Well, these are very shrewd people. We're not dealing with children. They have long experience of conspiracy and violence and dealing. And I guess that what is happening behind the scenes, which we can't see, is the sort of thing that's happening in Iraq, whereby a big Mercedes-Benz is driving to somebody's house to see what kind of deal can be cut with that person. And they would, if they are able to, they would choose to cut a deal. And I expect that that is what will happen. The army will give enough slack to the Muslim Brothers for the Muslim Brothers to say, you see, we're on our way. And the Muslim Brothers will hold their horses enough for the army to say, we've got stability. We can't have Sharia law in Egypt. We can't have alcohol banned, bikinis banned, tourism stopped. The country can't feed itself. And if the Muslim Brother program were to be installed in full, Egypt would go through a calamity. It wouldn't be able to pay for its way, it wouldn't be able to feed itself, and there would be a real humanitarian disasters. It's the world's largest importer of wheat, and of course the United States sells it that wheat. If the United States decided that for one reason or another it wasn't going to sell that wheat, well, the Egyptians would be in very dire circumstances. So there's no leeway, really, for gambling. It's too
well,
dangerous.
I think there is a huge... I think there's a big gamble here. If I could stay with you, David, I mean, give the Muslim Brotherhood the presidency. The country's economically in crisis. Unemployment is high. We've talked about wheat imports. I mean, wow, what a wonderful position to be in when the country's in crisis. And say, look, the Muslim Brotherhood, they can't do it, okay? And we're going to have a new election. And what I'm trying to say is, you give them a very bad situation. It's like the Weimar Republic after the First World War. I mean, okay, give it to the socialists, okay? They weren't allowed to rule, and see what happened. What I'm saying is it's a planned disaster. It's a planned failure.
Well, it may be. I mean, all the Egyptians that I know are completely hostile to the Muslim Brothers and have been saying for a long time, since I've been going to Egypt, that they would one day take power, and God spare the country when that happened. I don't know any Egyptian who talks otherwise. But the Muslim Brothers, I don't believe, are willing to plunge the country into some kind of mad torment, because they'll lose too. Everybody's the loser in that. I would guess the Egyptians actually are extremely practical and people, and they're not really given to cutting your throat. And I think they probably will manage in the end to come to some sort of deal about the constitution that's being written, which will give the Muslim Brothers at least a cover. And the Muslim Brothers will be able to accept that, and then we'll see what the next development is going to be. Probably it's to do with the Shia-Sunni split and the attitude taken by Saudi Arabia, and whether the money's coming and what the Americans are doing, and all the other great big factors.
Okay, Yaakov, I'll go back to you in Tel Aviv. What is this vote for the Arab Spring? Is it over? Is the Arab awakening over? I mean, again, I think, when you look at other young people in the region, they see that, the election process, you can elect people that you actually believe in and support, and then a government or a military can just say, no, we'll try it again. We'll throw the dice again because you voted the wrong way. What kind of precedent does that set for the region and young people having democratic aspirations?
Well, first of all, I think that we have to note that the Arab Spring, when it first occurred, was led by democratically minded, liberal, young, technology-savvy people. And those are not the people rising to power in Egypt now. And again, we've seen that model before. The same thing happened in Iran, unfortunately, in 1979. The people who first were most against the Shah and had the courage to stand up to him were not the people who eventually took power. So again, we have to note that within the anti-status quo movement, there is this split between the people leading the revolution and then the people riding the wave to take power. That's one thing. And second of all, your referral to the military's refusal to give up power, what that means is that there is no such thing as a smooth revolution, a smooth transfer. It's obvious that the old regime, the old guard, is always going to try and pull every trick in the book to try and hang on to power. I mean, that's what we're seeing in Egypt.
I mean, they're on the record. They're on the record of saying, once we do this, then we'll do this. Once you guys do this, we'll do this. And they keep breaking the word. How much longer can people believe them, if they believe them at all now? Go ahead.
I think that the more they break their word, the more likely it is that we will see civil disorder in places like Cairo and Alexandria, mass disorder, rioting. The more the military pull on this rope, the more they're going to ensure that the Muslim Brotherhood will mobilize the masses against them. The Muslim Brotherhood know this, and that is why they're comfortable, they're taking their time, and they're negotiating with the military from a position of increasing power. The military, again, it's fighting a losing battle. Eventually, it is going to lose this battle. I don't know when, but I'm confident it will happen.
David, I'll give you the last 10 seconds of the program. Go ahead.
I was never very enamored with this Arab Spring thing. What it really came from was despair, that the people are very unhappy. They know that they're the victims of injustice, that there are a small number of rich people. All right, I'm going to have to jump in here.
Looks like the injustice will continue. We've run out of time, gentlemen. Thank you very much. Many thanks to my guests today in London and in Tel Aviv. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time. And remember, crosstalk rules.